As President Trump toughens up his rhetoric against China during ongoing trade talks, a Politico investigation looked into aggressive Chinese efforts to acquire valuable U.S. technology. Politico says that the U.S. government does not have the resources to monitor foreign investments from China and other nations as they pursue, quote, next-generation software that powers the military and American economic strength. Cory Bennett is Deputy National Security Editor for Politico and co-author of that story. He joins me now from Arlington, Virginia. Cory, can you take us through what China is really aiming to accomplish by investing in U.S. technology companies?
Sure. I mean, for years, China has made money off of churning out a high volume of low-cost products. And around 2015, President Xi started a concerted push to invest in higher technology and the next generation industries that are going to be powering the economy 10, 20 years from now. Put out this report called Made in China 2025, and it directed Chinese investors to look overseas, to engage in mergers and acquisitions, to make early stage investments in these next generation technologies. We're talking about AI, robotics, space travel, the things that are not only going to be what people are competing for in the global economy 10, 20 years from now, but also what will be powering the military 10, 20 years from now. And they put this plan out and put a lot of resources behind it, $100 billion, and they coordinated with private sector individuals, with the billionaires in China, with the biggest VC companies in China, and they directed them to start spending their money overseas and investing in the high-tech industries that they did not necessarily have in China.
You know, speaking of investments, one of the examples you write about is a Chinese-linked company that actually tried to acquire a California microchip designer. What's wrong with a deal like that?
Well, there's nothing necessarily wrong with it, but it does raise questions. What occurred here was we found in a bankruptcy court there was this company, Atop Tech. It's an American microchip company that it was going bankrupt. And people didn't really think much about the fact that it was getting purchased. But we looked into the source of the money and the ownership behind the company that was purchasing it, Avatar. And we found that it was a Hong Kong-based businessman known as one of China's richest men. He was a steel magnate, and he had set up this company in March 2017, not too long before the purchase, and had swooped in and bought this despite concerns from many national security officials, former national security officials, who raised concerns to CFIUS directly. And CFIUS, I know that's kind of a mouthful, but it is the committee in the U.S. that reviews foreign investments in American technology. And they raised concerns that letting China or this Chinese businessman purchase this semiconductor company might be a national security concern. Semiconductors are really the guts of what's powering high-end military technology today. And it went unreviewed. The purchase went through. And we don't necessarily know that this will cause problems down the line. But national security officials are a little concerned about China's increasing acquisition of the type of American technology that our military will be relying on 10 to 20 years from now.
I think so many people just don't realize how intertwined that technology is with military capabilities for the U.S. When you talk about this company, the U.S. Committee on Foreign Investments, what do you think some of the things are that they have to consider when weighing in these business deals?
Well, one interesting thing is that CFIUS was set up in 1975, back when it was very obvious what a foreign purchase of something that was critical to the U.S. was. I'm thinking about planes. I'm thinking about steel, Acme Steel, these kind of giant mega companies. But that's not really how mergers and investments happen today. As one person who used to work with CFIUS told me, back in the day, people, when they were trying to buy an American company, they would just file a couple pages to CFIUS. Now it's binders that go up to the knees. And it's increasingly complex. It's more about data. It's more about technology. It's more about software. And this committee doesn't necessarily have the resources, the manpower, or the technical expertise to be reviewing these deals. And so it's become a big problem that they themselves have acknowledged. We talked to a very senior Treasury Department official who told us that they're working, around the clock, weekends, no vacations, essentially Wall Street banker plus hours without the monetary benefits that come with that necessarily. And they're not able to handle even the current workload. And people think that they need to expand that workload beyond that to look at many, many more types of deals, the ones like the Atop Tech deal in bankruptcy court that we were just talking about.
So do you see this committee actually getting the resources they need?
Yeah, so what's interesting is this is an issue that Congress and the White House has been looking at, and for about the last year and a half, there have been bills moving through both the House and the Senate, and just this past week, or I guess 2 days ago now, time is a tricky thing, but just on Tuesday, they marked up legislation that would increase CFIUS resources, that would increase the personnel, and it would streamline the budget, get them a single line item budget. One of the tough things is that the CFIUS budget is actually kind of whatever people at the 9 agencies that are part of it want to contribute. There's not a single line item for the CFIUS budget. So this would bolster the resources that CFIUS has. Whether or not that's enough to actually cover what it might need to review, that does remain an open question. But it does seem that this bill, now that it's been marked up, could get attached to the defense authorization bill that has to pass, and that gives it a pretty good chance of getting across the finish line.
Cory, when you talk about President Trump, he's focused a great deal on the trade deficit between the U.S. and China, but he hasn't really talked much about China taking our technology. Do you see him changing his rhetoric or focusing on this, and do you see the appetite in Washington growing to do something about it?
What's interesting is that the Trump administration has been looking into this and has done research on this, and it does support the bill that's in Congress, for example. The White House has asked that the administration come up with new restrictions on Chinese investment in the U.S. But Trump, as you mentioned, when he's speaking publicly about China and about what it's doing, it's about this trade deficit. It's about the purchase of goods and kind of this, in a very kind of old school sense of what goods are. And notably the tentative deal that was announced over the weekend in which Trump was going to hold off on tariffs on China was more about just purchasing several $billion in goods as kind of like one-time acquisition. And it did not notably address the issues that we're talking about, the issues about Chinese foreign investment in the United States, in U.S. startups, in the bankruptcy courts of things like microchip companies and robotics. And it didn't mention that. And that was something that people brought up as a point of concern. And so it remains to be seen whether Trump himself will change his rhetoric. But it is notable that his administration has been involved in this. But Trump does seem to be quite obsessed at a very top-line level on the trade deficit very specifically.
All right, Cory Bennett, grateful you could join us, Cory.
Thanks so much.